every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. Picture a quiet suburban street in Southern California. The sun beats down on uniform, beige stucco houses with manicured lawns and parked minivans. Muir Woods Road in the city of Paris looks like the realization of the American dream, a place where families raise children in safety and predictability. The houses are close together. You can hear your neighbor's dog bark, you can hear their car pull into the driveway, and you might wave to them as they check their mail. Suburbia relies on a social contract of casual observation. We assume that because we can see the house, we know what is happening inside. We assume that profound, systemic evil requires isolation, a dark cabin in the woods, or a fortified compound far from the eyes of society. Today, we dissect the anatomy of hidden abuse. We will explore how it is possible to construct a house of horrors, not in the remote wilderness, but in the middle of a densely populated subdivision. We will examine the case of David and Louise Turpin, who held their 13 children captive, starving and shackling them for years, while living right next door to ordinary people. This is an exploration of the visibility paradox, the psychological mechanisms of absolute control, and the extraordinary bravery required to shatter a lifelong prison. To understand the anatomy of this captivity, we must first look at the architects of the abuse. David Turpin and Louise Robinette did not fit the stereotypical profile of unhinged outcasts. Their relationship began decades earlier in West Virginia. David was from a strict Pentecostal family, known for being deeply religious and academically gifted. He attended Virginia Tech, earning a degree in computer engineering. Louise came from a more troubled background. But when they met, their bond was immediate and intense. David was 24, and Louise was 16 when they eloped in 1985, crossing state lines to marry in Texas. From the beginning, their dynamic was characterized by an extreme insular codependency. David provided the financial stability and the intellectual framework for their isolation, while Louise became the enforcer of their domestic reality. David's career is a crucial element of the visibility paradox. He was a highly successful computer engineer. Over the years, he worked for prestigious defense contractors, including Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. He earned a six-figure salary and held high-level security clearances. He was a man who passed rigorous background checks, a man trusted with national security secrets, a man who drove to a corporate office every day and interacted with colleagues. He functioned perfectly in the professional world, providing a veneer of immense respectability. As their family grew, eventually reaching 13 children, the Turpins began to construct a fortress disguised as a home. Their descent into total abuse was not instantaneous. It was a slow, methodical tightening of the perimeter. In the early years, living in Texas, the children were sometimes seen by neighbors. They were enrolled in public school for a brief period, but soon the parents withdrew them, citing a desire to homeschool. This is the first critical failure point in the anatomy of their hidden abuse. Homeschooling laws, particularly in the states where the Turpins lived, often operate on a high-trust model with minimal oversight. By registering their home as a private school, David Turpin effectively erased his children from the view of the state. There were no truant officers, no mandated reporters like teachers or school nurses, and no annual welfare checks. The home became an unregulated sovereign territory. The physical isolation was matched by severe psychological conditioning. The children were all given names starting with the letter J, While this might seem like a simple quirk of a large family in the context of their abuse, it served to strip away individuality. They were dressed in identical, matching outfits. When they were taken out of the house, they were a monolith, not a group of distinct human beings. The parents utilized an extreme, twisted interpretation of Scripture to demand absolute obedience. They convinced their children that David and Louise spoke directly for God, and that to question them or to seek help from the outside world was a mortal sin that would result in eternal damnation. The conditions inside the house degraded significantly as the family moved from Texas to California, eventually settling in Murrieta and then Paris. The parents instituted a nocturnal schedule. The children were forced to sleep all day and stay awake all night. This was a calculated logistical decision to avoid the casual observation of the neighborhood. If the children were awake during the day, they might look out the windows, or a neighbor might hear them. By reversing their circadian rhythms, the Turpins ensured their victims were only active when the rest of the world was asleep. The physical abuse was staggering in its cruelty. The children were subjected to severe chronic malnutrition. They were fed only once a day, usually a meager portion of peanut butter, bologna, or a frozen burrito. Meanwhile, David and Louise ate fast food and elaborate meals right in front of them. The parents would buy pies, leave them on the counter, and forbid the children to eat them. They would buy toys, leave them in their original packaging, and forbid the children to touch them. This was not merely neglect. It was active, sadistic psychological torture. It was a demonstration of absolute power over the most fundamental human needs and desires. Cleanliness was another weapon of control. The children were allowed to shower only once a year. If they washed their hands above the wrist, they were severely punished for playing with water. The house became a biological hazard. It was filled with trash, feces, and a suffocating stench. When the children inevitably angered their parents, the punishments escalated from physical beatings to being thrown across the room, and eventually, to being chained. At first, they were tied to their beds with ropes. When one of the boys managed to free himself, the parents escalated to heavy chains and padlocks, leaving them restrained for weeks or months at a time, unable to even use a bathroom. Yet, the visibility paradox continued to operate. The Turpins maintained a bizarre, curated digital footprint. They had a joint Facebook account where they posted photos of the family. These photos showed all 13 children in matching outfits, smiling rigidly, standing with their parents at Disneyland, or attending vow renewal ceremonies in Las Vegas with an Elvis impersonator. To a casual scroller, they looked like a quirky, devout, perhaps overly regimented family. They did not look like hostages. The parents essentially paraded their captives in public, confident that the psychological chains they had forged were stronger than any physical lock. They had convinced the children that the outside world was evil and would destroy them if they spoke out. But the human spirit is remarkably resilient. Deep within this environment of profound deprivation, a spark of rebellion began to form in the mind of a 17-year-old girl named Jordan Turpin. Jordan, despite being nearly an adult, looked like a child of 10 due to the severe starvation. She had virtually no formal education. Her knowledge of the outside world came almost entirely from observing the restricted television programs her parents occasionally allowed, and from secretly watching videos on a deactivated smartphone she had managed to hide. The anatomy of Jordan's escape is a study in extraordinary courage and meticulous planning. For 2 years, she and her older sisters whispered in the dark, formulating a plan. The catalyst for action came when Jordan overheard her mother say that the family was going to move to Oklahoma. Jordan knew that if they moved again, the isolation would deepen, and they might not survive. The older children were wasting away. The 22-year-old weighed only 72 pounds. Jordan realized it was a matter of life or death. In the early morning hours of January 14, 2018, Jordan put her plan into motion. She grabbed the deactivated smartphone. She had used it to take photographs of her sisters chained to their beds, knowing she would need irrefutable proof of the nightmare they were living. Her older sister, who was supposed to escape with her, panicked and turned back, overwhelmed by the ingrained terror of their parents. Jordan had to go alone. She slipped out of a window, leaving the only world she had ever known, and stepped onto the suburban pavement of Muir Woods Road. Jordan walked until she found a clear cell signal and dialed 911. The audio of that emergency call is one of the most chilling and heartbreaking recordings in the history of true crime. When the dispatcher answered, Jordan's voice was thin, breathless, and terrified. She stated that she had just run away from home, that she had 15 sisters and brothers, and that 2 of them were chained to their beds. The conversation that followed highlighted the profound depth of her isolation. When the dispatcher asked for her address, Jordan could not provide it. She could read the street name off a sign, but she did not know the house number. She did not know what a zip code was. When asked if anyone in the house was on medication, she did not know what the word medication meant. She told the dispatcher that she had not been bathed in almost a year, and that she sometimes woke up unable to breathe because the house was so dirty. The dispatcher, maintaining professional composure while clearly grappling with the bizarre nature of the call, dispatched officers to the area. Deputy Anthony Collis of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department was the first to locate Jordan. He found a frail, trembling girl sitting on an embankment. When he spoke to her, she showed him the photographs on the phone. The images were undeniable. They showed pale, emaciated figures padlocked to bunk beds in a filthy room. Deputy Collis and his fellow officers proceeded to the Turpin residence. When the police knocked on the door, David Turpin answered. He appeared confused, playing the role of the perplexed suburban father, but when the officers entered the house, the facade collapsed instantly. The stench of human waste and decaying garbage hit them like a physical wall. The house was dark, the windows covered, and then they found the children. The officers discovered 3 of the victims chained to their furniture. One was the 22-year-old woman. The police initially believed they were rescuing young children. It was a profound shock when they realized that 7 of the 13 victims were legal adults, ranging in age from 18 to 29. Their physical development had been so severely stunted by starvation that the adults looked like middle schoolers. The children were immediately removed from the house and transported to local hospitals. They were severely malnourished, suffering from cognitive impairment, muscle wasting, and severe vitamin deficiencies. Some had heart damage from the chronic starvation. The arrest of David and Louise Turpin sent shockwaves through the country. The media descended on Paris. Neighbors were interviewed, all expressing profound disbelief. They said they rarely saw the children, and when they did, they assumed they were just pale, shy kids. They saw the house, they saw the cars, they saw the Christmas lights the parents put up. They saw the surface, and the surface looked normal. The visibility paradox had worked perfectly. The Turpins had hidden their atrocities behind the banal camouflage of middle-class, suburban life. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. The prosecution filed dozens of charges against David and Louise, including torture, false imprisonment, child abuse, and dependent adult abuse. Bail was set at an unprecedented $12 million each. The evidence was overwhelming. There were the photographs, the medical records, the chains recovered from the house, and hundreds of journals kept by the children detailing their daily suffering. Faced with the prospect of a lengthy trial that would force their children to testify and recount the horrors publicly, the defense attorneys negotiated a plea deal. In February of 2019, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to 14 felony counts. The court proceedings offered a brief, chilling glimpse into their lack of remorse. During the sentencing hearing, some of the older children delivered victim impact statements. They stood in the courtroom, speaking through tears about the lost years, the hunger, and the terror. When given the chance to speak, David and Louise offered tearful, self-pitying statements, claiming they loved their children and only wanted the best for them, a final, grotesque attempt to maintain the delusion of a loving family. The judge was unswayed. He condemned their actions in the strongest possible terms, noting that their lives would be defined by the selfish, cruel, and inhuman treatment of their own flesh and blood. David and Louise Turpin were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. It was the maximum sentence available under the plea agreement, ensuring that they would likely die behind bars. The anatomy of hidden abuse is a complex structure built on isolation, manipulation, and the exploitation of societal trust. The Turpin case proved that extreme captivity does not require a remote dungeon. It requires only the systematic breaking of the human will, a rigid control of information, and the willingness of society to look no further than a closed front door. The parents used the legal shield of homeschooling to sever the children's ties to the outside world. They used religious extremism to instill paralyzing fear. They used starvation and physical restraint to enforce compliance. And they used a carefully constructed public image to blind their neighbors to the truth. But the structure of abuse, no matter how carefully built, has a fatal flaw. It relies entirely on the absolute suppression of hope. David and Louise Turpin managed to suppress the physical growth of their children. They managed to suppress their education, their socialization, and their voices, but they failed to suppress the fundamental human drive for survival and freedom. Jordan Turpin's decision to climb out of that window was an act of rebellion against an entire universe of conditioning. She stepped into a world she did not understand, armed with nothing but a deactivated cell phone and a desperate will to save her siblings. The legacy of the House of Horrors is undoubtedly one of unimaginable cruelty and systemic failure. It forces us to question the limits of privacy and the responsibilities we have to our neighbors. But ultimately, the true anatomy of this case is defined not by the chains the parents forged, but by the strength it took to break them. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.